I wouldn't have high expectations for the White Sox as the offseason begins, but that does not mean it'll be an uneventful one, although a few things have to go the team's way.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan. I've been podcasting here for over a year and a half and covering the team well before then. And also I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. And thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Well, I'm going to get to the Minor League Monday report to discuss how the team's prospects did last week in the Arizona Fall League, after I discuss where the White Sox fall in some way too early power rankings for the 2026 season as a possible sign of how that season could go. But first, let's discuss how likely an underwhelming offseason can still be an eventful one. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Well, the past couple of off seasons, the White Sox have had some attention on them based on the trade rumors around Dylan Cease and Garrett Crochet. You know, basically the past two off seasons, the White Sox have had some of the most desired pitchers on the trade market. But this off season, the White Sox do not have any players on the trade market that teams are just dying to get. MLBTradeRumors.com's top 40 trade candidates does not list a single White Sox player. And then despite not having a lot of payroll commitments, I wouldn't expect the White Sox to be making some major free agent spendings. You know, even though they got plenty of money that they could play with, and this is the offseason to maybe get some rebuild shortcut signings done, they're probably not going to be having, you know, a major spending spree. So since there are no sell watches, no sweepstake watches, how the heck could this offseason still be eventful? Well, I've got three ways. The first one, December 9th and December 10th, breaking the White Sox way. 2, getting the pitching coach and hitting coach hiring correct. And 3, using that limited money that there is to spend in free agency more effectively to put a better veteran cast around this young core to where they can actually, you know, win more of these close games that they lost in 2025. Now, December 9th is the MLB Draft Lottery. And if the White Sox can come away with the first overall pick, it's going to be monumental for the franchise. It would be huge. It's huge in a few ways. First, you're going to get the most bonus pool money to work with. And this is a draft where there are a lot of potential studs at the top of the draft. So you could do exactly what the Nationals did last July, where they went with Eli Willits, who may have not been the, you know, best player available, but he was still, you know, top 5, top 10 guy. But he might not even be in the same league as some of these other top 5 prospects in the draft. And even if this, you know, White Sox end up with the second pick, that's going to be huge because, you know, you can end up with whoever, you know, the number one team passes on falling into your lap. Kind of like the, you know, 2019 draft where the White Sox ended up with Andrew Vaughn. It was a draft where there was basically only 2 studs, Adley Rutschman and Bobby Witt Jr., and then it was a whole bunch of question marks. In this next year's draft, there are at least probably 5 guys, 5 or 6 prospects that when I look at could be the number 1 overall pick, and they would be the number 1 overall pick legitimately, not because you're kind of trying to spread your money around, kind of again what the Nationals did. But even then, there's still going to be plenty of money to play with in next year's draft. And that's important because the White Sox can try to go for a couple more high upside players in round 2 and round 3, whereas in this past draft, you even saw they only had enough money to go big in round 2. Then they had to go cost effective in round 3. So the White Sox also that means, you know, that's huge because again, the White Sox will be drafting second in every round after the first round. So they can use that large pool to add more players that can help this franchise hopefully not only get back to being competitive by the end of the decade, but into next decade. And Rock Chwalski, he's supposed to be a stud. Justin LeBron, he's supposed to be a stud. And there are prep shortstops who could be studs too. But then on December 10th, coming away in the Rule 5 draft with a player who can be a big league contributor. Not saying an all-star like Shane Smith, but coming away with another big league contributor would be huge for the White Sox. And they should take someone in the Rule 5 because they're drafting second. And I think they should be looking at a pitcher again, especially since, I think they've kind of cracked the code. Find a guy that has, good velocity, a decent repertoire of pitches that maybe you can hone and help you out. And especially those are easier guys to stash in the bullpen in a long relief situation. And if you think about it, Smith and Vassell both can throw their fastball at least 95 miles an hour or above. So I think if the White Sox can try to find a similar profile, they can find a way to maybe help boost their rotation. Maybe, again, I'm not saying it'll be an all-star pitcher, but let's say you get a decent starting pitcher. That can be huge. But if anything, get a bullpen arm that can help you in high leverage situations and that can help you out long term. I think that would be massive for the White Sox. Because think about it, the White Sox 2 best moves last year was drafting Shane Smith with the number 1 overall pick in the Rule 5 draft and then claiming Mike Vassell off of waivers before opening day. Those were like your 2 most outstanding moves that they've made. So again, it doesn't have to be the headline making move to be an eventful one. And the theme of next season is, and I'm going to be preaching this, is internal improvements at the big league level, along with the eventually incorporating other top prospects such as pitchers Noah Schultz, Hagen Smith, Tanner McDougal, along with outfielder Brandon Montgomery into the core. So that means you got to have the right pitching coach to help pitching director Brian Bannister keep guys like Smith's career trending toward A status, or Sean Burke being able to reclaim being at least a solid number 3 starter, and then making sure Grant Taylor can either be a good starter or an elite reliever, depending on which direction they want to go with. But then also making sure Jordan Leisure, Winkleman Gonzalez, maybe Peyton Pallette, they develop into high leverage relievers. Either way, the young pitchers, they can't regress or stagnate. And that's why I firmly believe the team let pitching coach Ethan Katz go, because not many guys were actually ascending under him, at least lately. And you saw how the bullpen, yeah, he worked well with them and communicated well with them, but they didn't execute in high leverage. Now, part of it was talent, but another part of it is you got to help whatever Brian Bannister's preaching. Katz has got to help out too, and it just wasn't happening. And the same for the hitting coach. Colson Montgomery, Kyle Teel, and Edgar Carroll, they have to take the next step in stardom at the plate. Chase Meidroth has to prove he can be, a guy that can hit for average and be a walk machine at second base. Miguel Vargas and Lenine Sosa at least have to still hit at a raised floor player level. And maybe Curtis Meade can reach his former top 100 prospect status. That is why hitting director Ryan Fuller needs help in that area at the big league level. So that's why they got to hit on these 2 hires. Then let's say the White Sox budget is at, like, say, $90 million, like SoxMachine.com is using for their offseason project. If I did my math correctly on past shows, and I've done it, Andrew Benintendi and Luis Robert Jr. are going to take up $37.1 million of the payroll. And if they do bring back Mike Tauchman and Steve Wilson at a combined, I think it would be $5 million, I believe, and then you pay the minimums to the non-ARB guys, you basically only got $55 to $60 million committed. So the front office does have some money to spend. Not a ton, but enough to where GM Chris Getz can shop maybe in the figurative bargain bin and discount rack rather than the scrap heap. And if his front office lieutenants can help him out on identifying those value players, they might be able to put together a better bullpen and add a few starting pitchers to help the young core win some more tight games and then be flipped for some more pieces at the trade deadline. And that's what the young kids need. They need better veteran support, especially in the first half of the season, and especially in those high leverage reliever situations. And they need to get better starts from what they got from, say, Aaron Savali. Maybe getting an upgrade at first base with a player who can actually hit home runs. That would be nice. I know it's not thrilling, especially when Josh Naylor, Kyle Schwarber, and Pete Alonso, they're on the market. But again, the team's not likely going to be shopping in the high-priced talent section. But if they can pull off the right hires at pitching and hitting coach, add some solid veteran free agents to the rotation of the bullpen at first, and win the MLB Draft Lottery and come away with a player who can be a contributor in the Rule 5, I think that's a chance to have an eventful offseason. And speaking of next season, the White Sox might already be predicted to start climbing up the power rankings, and let's discuss some hints of where they might be in the league's hierarchy after the break. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. And it keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. And I'm always telling you about how fun it is to play FanDuel's traditional money lines, the over-unders, and the spreads. But if you want to win some big-time money or at least double or triple your cash, play FanDuel's props, parlays, or futures. So, for example, think Chicago can ride this hot start to a surprising 50-plus win season? That's at plus 430. So you got a chance to quadruple your money if that happens. Let's say you're going to be more realistic and build a parlay of Chicago having more than 40 wins and making the play-in game. That goes off at plus 308, so a chance to triple your money if that happens. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets to use when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, you can get the audio version of the show on places such as Apple or Spotify. So make sure to follow or subscribe it wherever you get your podcast. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me and maybe some hope. And also make sure to check out my written content at SouthsideSox.com and on TabSportsNet.com. So I don't put a lot of stock into power rankings as they tend to be very subjective, and you're going to see it in a few moments when I discuss it. One team, can still have the better record, but technically be worse than another club with an even worse record. I mean, i.e., see my belief in that I thought the White Sox were the better team than the Pirates on days Paul Skeens wasn't pitching. I mean, when Paul Skeens was pitching, the Pirates were a very good team. They could almost say, for love of the game, we're the best team in baseball right now. We don't stink because of you, Paul. But then the days he wasn't pitching, Pirates, I'm sorry, they were terrible, especially in that series that the White Sox played them. I mean, they were booting the ball all over the field. I thought the White Sox were a better team than the Pirates, and that's a hill I'll die on. But again, it's just subjective. And the way too earlys and the early odds for the World Series do provide at least an idea, though, of the tier of the team the White Sox might be next season, especially since, again, the White Sox are going to be they're not going to be making major upgrades, but they've got a chance, again, as I said in the first segment, to at least, get some more core players in and also at least try to get themselves to that 70 to 75 win marker that I would love for them to get to. And I think one of the goals for next season, beyond internal improvement and still incorporating some more of these top prospects into core status, is start climbing up the standings to continue to show things are headed in the right direction. So while wins and losses still won't matter, and because internal improvement and the development of the additional potential core pieces that are still in the minors, that matters more. I would like to see that leap from to 70 to 75 wins. I would love to see a 15-win improvement. That would be huge. But the White Sox are still projected to be bad. But hey, ESPN's David Schoenfeld, he has the White Sox as the best team in what I would say is in the collection of bad. So among the peers in bad, he thinks they're the best of the bunch. However, USA Today's Steve Gardner still has the White Sox among the 3 worst teams in baseball in his way too early power rankings. The Athletic staff thinks the White Sox are actually going to still be the worst team in the American League. And FanDuel has the White Sox among the 3 teams with the worst odds to win the 2026 World Series and the worst odds to win the ALCS. So in terms of what FanDuel has for the White Sox to win the World Series, that's at plus 50,000. And only the Rockies and the Nationals have the same early odds as the White Sox are winning the World Series. So that just shows you where they think the White Sox are going to be at. And in terms of winning the ALCS, the last time I checked, the White Sox were at plus 50,000. So the worst odds to win the ALCS. Now, Gardner puts the White Sox in the still a, he kind of categorized it instead of ranking it. And he puts them in the ways off category with fellow peer and bad, the Angels ahead of the Pale Hose. But he does have the White Sox ahead of the Nationals, Pirates, and the Rockies. And I found it interesting that Gardner had the Twins listed in the next tier of needs improvement. I mean, I found it interesting because they ripped everything down at the trade deadline. And they could actually do more tearing down in the offseason. So that's why I would have put them in the still ways to go I know they have a talented farm system, but those players have to be incorporated into the club, much like what the White Sox just did this season. And obviously things could go differently. They could end up with more wins than say 16 wins, but you see what happens when you're trying to incorporate young talent. And if they do trade off Joe Ryan, if they do trade off Pablo Lopez, suddenly they don't have that rotation that's going to keep them in games. And even then, you saw they had those guys, and they had one of the worst second half records. So that's why I see the Twins taking a step back and possibly finishing last in the AL Central, especially if they complete their teardown this offseason. And, Schoenfeld at least sees kind of what I'm thinking here is he has the Twins 27th in his power rankings. Now, he puts the White Sox 24th, and he writes this. It's obviously been a rough 3 years with 3 consecutive 100-loss seasons, but I like the general direction here with an interesting group of impact rookies arriving in 2025. Colson Montgomery, Kyle Teal, Edgar Caro, Shane Smith, Sean Burke, plus outfielder Brandon Montgomery and pitchers Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith not far away. It will be interesting to see if the club picks up its $20 million option on Luis Robert Jr. He certainly hasn't been worth that salary in the past 2 seasons, but maybe the White Sox will take the gamble and hope once more he can find his 2023 level 5.3 WAR. And if there's no regression and stagnation among the rookies he mentioned, and then, the additional core pieces like Schultz, Smith, and Brandon Montgomery, along with, say, Tanner McDougal, maybe Shane Murphy, showing that they can be core players next season, I think moving up in the standings to a spot like 24th overall, that's possible. I do think that that's possible. And Schoenfeld had Baltimore 24th in his power rankings at the end of the season, and they finished 75 and 87. So if they could get a 15-win improvement, that would be a huge boost in showing things are trending in the right direction. And I'm going to be happy with a 10 to 15-win improvement next season. I think that would be one of the missions being accomplished. Along with, again, all the young players continuing to show improvement, and Schultz and Smith and McDougal and Murphy and Braden all making their big league debuts and proving that they belong. However, there's still cynics out there, like the Athletic writing staff. They're not moved by the White Sox young core when they rank Chicago 29th in their way too early rankings. This is what they write. Welcome to another window of time for the White Sox in which the prevailing question will be, is this when Robert is traded? A riveting way to follow your favorite baseball club, I'm sure. Chicago will certainly pick up Robert's club option, given that he had an 808 second half OPS after a 599 first half OPS before a season-ending hamstring injury late in August. This seems as a good time as any to cash in on his trade value. Elsewhere on the roster, the White Sox have a ton of young talent, but they're a long way from relevance. But at least we're not ranking them last this year. Although I would put more stock on them being bearish on the White Sox if that publication actually covered the team on a daily basis. Again, cashing in his trade value. The reason why they're going to exercise his option is they're still chasing that white whale of a trade package. They would know that if they were paying attention a lot more. If they didn't fire James Fegan or lay him off to save on costs, even though you still got 2 beat writers for the Cubs and 2 beat writers, and I love those writers. Scott Power and Mark Lazarus, but you have basically 2 beat writers for the Blackhawks. I would put some stock in them putting the White Sox 29th again, but this just seemed lazy to me. Like, I think Gardner, his power rankings, 27th, as he had or around there. I could see that being fair. 24th, again, just thinking, hey, things are trending up. That's, again, somebody that's maybe paying attention. But to put the White Sox 29th in terms of going into the next season, I think that's just, being lazy and just using these easy narratives, especially when you cite cashing in on Luis Robert Jr.'s trade value. If they would have done that, they would have done that at the trade deadline. Well, speaking of Brandon Montgomery, he had a monster game on Saturday in the Arizona Fall League as he is crushing the ball along with 2 of his other fellow White Sox prospects in the Arizona Fall League. Let's go over that on this week's Minor League Monday Report, and that's coming up after the break. NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle. Between queues, login screens, and prices jumping at checkout, it's frustrating. And that's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. I pulled up Game Time, and in just a couple of taps, I saw amazing deals. I'm talking about your favorite NFL games for as low as $100. The app made it super simple. I could even see the exact view from my seat before buying. I love zone deals too. Pick the section, Game Time picks the seats, and you save big. Honestly, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go! Download Game Time today. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox, wherever they get their podcasts, as this show's available on all major podcast platforms. Hope you had a good weekend. Mine was relatively low-key. Watched the Bears game. That's why I got the Bears hat on. That game was just drunk. But at least they pulled it out, because I was like, I cannot believe this is happening. I thought they were definitely going to blow it. And then Colston Loveland into the end zone. Great pass by Caleb Williams. That was huge. Go Bears. So I got 5 players that I think are worth tracking in the Arizona Fall League the rest of the way. Obviously, top prospect Brandon Montgomery, top 30 prospect Sam Antonacci, and then the 2 first base prospects in Caden Connor and Ryan Galaney. And then last year's first-round pick, Hagen Smith. Those are kind of the guys that I would say are worth checking in on. Montgomery, he's tearing the cover off the ball in the AFL. Antonacci and Connor are the 2 top hitters the Desert Dogs have among the actual qualified hitters to be tracked as the leaders. And Smith continues to show good command on the mound. One moment here. Sorry, I had to hit the cough button there. So Montgomery had a huge game on Saturday that MLB Pipeline wrote about, as I want to share some nuggets from Jesse Borik's piece that he has on MLB Pipeline here. The Glendale Desert Dogs had just lost in walk-off fashion. Brandon Montgomery heard the calls of fans seeking autographs, pictures, and a moment to rub shoulders with the White Sox #1 prospect. His uncle and grandmother, the latter of whom drove down from Southern California to watch Montgomery play, awaited in the stands as well. But first, took the time to clean up the dugout. Quote, "That's just who he is," said Braves infielder Nacho Alvarez Jr. of his teammate during the fall league. "He's one of the best dudes I've ever met. I mean, the baseball player, he's great. But at the end of the day, if you're not a good dude, it speaks volumes. You can tell his parents raised him the right way, and he just makes sure to do what he has to do every single day," end quote. Montgomery also did his job during game action for Glendale, slugging his first homer of the fall campaign during the club's 10-9 loss to Mesa at Sloan Park on Saturday afternoon. He added a 2-run triple in the 9th to an earlier single, giving him a 3-hit, 4 RBI performance in total. Through 7 AFL games, he's slashing .435, .606, .696, and has more walks, 9, than strikeouts, 7. A unique part of the fall league is that with so many pitchers trying to get innings under their belt, it's not often batters face the same hurler multiple times in a game. Couple in the varying levels of experience that said pitchers have, and even though it's known as a hitter-friendly circuit, batters can sometimes be up against it, ditching data for good old-fashioned see-ball, hit-ball. Quote, "I treat it as good practice," said Montgomery of the challenge, "because every once in a while, you'll have a time during the regular season where you're leading off the inning, and especially coming from the outfield, it's not like you've got a lot of time to be able to look at a scouting report, as well as get timing and watch the guy actually throwing pitches on the mound. I find it to be good practice going up there for like semi-blind, because at the end of the day, you've still got to be able to play baseball," end quote. Now, after 8 games now, Montgomery has a 1.183 OPS. And if he had played the first 2 weeks, because again, he was out with that foot injury that ended his minor league season prematurely. That's one of the reasons why he is in the Arizona Fall League. He would be officially leading the Desert Dogs in all slash line categories. Instead, Sam Antonacci, he's the official hitting leader of the Desert Dogs, as he had another outstanding week at the plate in the AFL. He's now up to a 367, 472, 517 slash line and a team-leading 989 OPS. Caden Connor is second with a 918 OPS. Now, he is still yet to homer, but he is getting on base, man. 541 OBP. And it makes you wonder if he can start working his way into the picture of being considered a contributor on the next good team. Although it might not be at first base because the power numbers might not be there. He had just 7 dingers across high A, double A, and triple A this past season. He had a 359 slug at Winston-Salem, a 363 slug at Birmingham, but he did have a 410 slug at Charlotte. So maybe he can produce a solid slug in a better hitting park like Wright Field. And he does have a 404 slug in the Arizona Fall League. So if you can't get, and I've always thought this too, when it, again, comes to a first baseman or even a corner outfielder, if you can't get massive home run numbers, can you make up for it in terms of OBP and at least producing a slug over 400? Basically, give me some professional at-bats like we saw with Mike Tauchman this year in Chicago's right field. And if Connor can do that, yeah, I think there's a chance that you got to consider him, whether he is in left field or at first base at the big league level. The issue is, though, he's an older prospect. He is 25. And I think he's got to seize this opportunity that he has because Tim Elko is going to be missing a lot of time next year after having ACL surgery. So Connor has an opportunity to build on this outstanding Arizona Fall League to make a name for himself in the organization and maybe move up the hierarchy. And again, he can also play right field and he can play some left. So there's some positional versatility there for him. Ryan Glaney, he's another first base prospect who could try to push his case for the potential of being a long-term solution at first. However, he is still struggling to impress in the AFL. Good on-base percentage at 375, but just a 256 average and a 279 slug. So he's got to, I think, kind of finish out strong. And then he's definitely got to work on being able to drive the ball a lot more. Hagen Smith, he pitched on the 29th. Not a memorable one, but a solid outing. 1 run, 1 hit, 1 walk, 1 strikeout, and 3 innings of work. Good command per FutureSox.net as 27 of his 40 pitches went for strikes. And I've been impressed with how Smith has been able to show improved command in the Arizona Fall League. Is again, that plagued him pretty much this entire year at Double-A. That gave off some, oh man, this could be a potential bust type vibes. And especially since Connor Griffin is now the #1 overall prospect per MLB Pipeline that the White Sox could have drafted, or JJ Weatherholt, a top 5 prospect per MLB Pipeline. And again, the White Sox pass on him to get Smith because they know that they can develop left-handed pitchers. So again, what he's been doing at the Arizona Fall League, especially again, it's very hitter friendly, being able to get through these 3 innings and show good command, that's, promising. Now he's got to be able to do it next year and do it over 5-6 innings and stay healthy. If he can do that, then I do think we've got a chance of seeing him in Chicago at some point in 2026. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On MLB Game Night. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or every listener podcast. I'll be back tomorrow with Dylan Barnes of Future Sox and Just Baseball to discuss what the White Sox should do with their young catchers. You can leave comments about today's episode on the episode page on YouTube via email lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com or X, formerly Twitter, @LockedOnSox or @ToddJDub. Also, make sure to like today's episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts, and also subscribe to the YouTube channel @Locked On White Sox or wherever you get your audio-only podcasts. Have a great day, and I will talk to you tomorrow.